Namo Fo, Namo Fa, Namo Seng. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Welcome to part 3 of the art of keeping the light, of 48 methods to Nyenfo, to Buddha recitation practice. So, just as a reminder, in the first part, we received a manual of practice, really, with a range of practices. In the second part of the text, we received diverse kind of advices on how to apply this practice in our life. In this third part of the text, which is by far the most important, we will receive the marrow of the practice, its true meaning, its depth, in a way. Funnily, interestingly, the text first shows us the esoteric part, the absolute part of the practice in the third part that we will enter now. And then the exoteric, more relative, more concrete part. You will see that it has some importance. But first, there are some passages that we will just not see in depth because they are more cultural to the Chinese people and they don't really have a meaning in our Western life. For example, section 26 of the original 48 methods is reciting the Buddha's name to repay your filial debt. We can taste the Confucianist origin of this kind of section of the text, which is based really in social harmony through paying your filial debt, through actually to showing up and to show people around that you care for your family and ancestors. It's a community thing, so it's important to show people, to show the ancestors. But it's not really about what's in your heart while you are doing it. It's not about doing it fully with one-minded body. It is about showing that you pay attention and respect to your ancestors. So it is really a Confucian thing and not that Buddhist really. The text says briefly that there is a relative aspect by respecting the name of the ancestors, but there is an absolute way to pay respect to your ancestors, to your parents, and that the only thing that really glorifies your family, which is a real cause for Buddhahood, is the benedictions, the gifts, the blessings which are born from samadhi, from the wonderful practice of oneness, of attention. And that this type of practice is the best seed one can sow. In the text, interestingly, it talks about a diamond seed. A diamond seed is a seed that cuts through. That's an interesting image because that's a seed for change. Samadhi, right practice, by just saying the name, by just practicing mindfulness of the breath, by just sitting, by just listening, by just walking, any practice done with one body, mind, heart, breath, is a wonderful practice because it is a seed of diamond that cuts everything. It will bring the change, which is the best gift, the best blessing one can give to the one can receive, and the best glorification, the best um, way to pay our filial uh, piety. So that was one part that we don't explain, and I won't go into the details of the text. Another part which is very interesting is section 27 of the original 48, practicing charity through Buddha recitation. And you can say that there is a difference between what is important and what is urgent. Can I say that in English? Urgent? What needs to be done quickly and what is important. Um, in a relative side, people need help, and we need really to help others on a very material plane. But on the absolute side, what is really important is to realize our own nature and to make of this word, of this mind, a true pure land in our own lifetime, in this body and mind. Sorry. The text goes on. There's another part to that section of the text which is about transferring merit, which is one way which you can help yourself and others to go to the Pure Land in the most traditional sense. But how is it done? And for whom can we do this? So there are different degrees in the transfer of merit. First, to one single person, generally oneself, or one person we are dedicating our practice to. Then to all beings, to a certain surface, a certain area, like this town where I'm in, for example. I can dedicate the merits to people in this town, to the net, the social net I'm living in, the community. And then to all beings in the six realms of samsara. So, this was the section. I won't go into too much details. And then we really begin part 3 of the text, which is really a wonderful gift. And is at the crossroads between the practice of Huatu and the practice of listening meditation. And both are really, really linked to one another in Chan Buddhism. They are not different, not the same. One taste yet different. And we will go specifically into listening meditation. And I will also talk, of course, of Huatu, but this section is section 15 of our booklet and section 28 of the original. It's called Self-Nature Recitation, Self-Nature Listening. So we received 10 methods to recitate, and we've been given these methods to accomplish. It was really a gift, that first part of the text, But before really opening the text of part 3, it's important for me to emphasize the fact that, in theory, you should have really practiced these methods, at least one of the 10 methods that were given before. Actually, not 10 methods, but yeah, in the manual, in the first part. This is really important because the text supposes that you have a certain strength in your practice, that you are rooted in the practice of recitation. Because at some point in the practice of concentration to recitation, in the different ways which have been shown, one needs help to go further in the practice. We need a more subtle kind of advice. And that's really what part 3 is. So, the mind begins to think, which moves the tongue. The tongue in turn moves, producing sound, and that sound returns to the self-mind. This is the method of mind reciting, mind listening. So this is really the method. You would say, okay, there is nothing new in here. Actually, that's a wonderful part. For me, the most wonderful section in all these texts. Because it is a very, very brief summary of the Shurangama Sutra. The mind begins to think, which moves the tongue in turn moves, producing sound, and that sound returns to the self-mind. So the first part here, the mind begins to think, which moves the tongue in turns moves. That's really how things are generally. That's different links of causation. Of, okay, how do we make sounds? From the very beginning, there is no thought, then a thought appears, and then at the end, a sound will be uttered, will be said. And the Shurangama Sutra goes into great depth into seeing that link, that chain, and actually going at the very beginning of the chain, before even the first thought. So this method is very simple. We say often in our tradition, fully recite, fully listen. As simple as that. Text goes on. If the mind recites and listens, the eyes cannot see wrongly, the nose cannot smell wrongly, the body cannot move wrongly, because the mind has been kidnapped by the words Amitabha Buddha. So, if we fully recite and fully listen, what part of us can be outside of it? What part of us can be entertained in some wrong, as the texts say, action through another sense? We are totally into one practice, totally concentrated. And the next section of the text goes deeper into this. So the words we are reciting, in this case Amitofo, or any other mantra, or any other name, and again, any other practice. See, if I'm concentrating on oneness of body, mind, and breath, if I'm concentrated on breathing, if I'm concentrated on reciting the name, it's exactly the same thing. If you are totally concentrated and totally observing, then there is not a single iota, a single space for self to look upon what is happening. There is not a single part of you which is, okay, now I'm listening well, not, but I'm reciting very well now, and I've been listening better, and there is no room for that. All the senses are caught up into wanting. And there are so much times in our daily lives when we actually have a taste of that. When we are tasting a wonderful cake, so good. It's just wanting cake. The taste of it is the whole universe at that very time. That may be for me. Just find what it is for you. Anyway, this just listening, just reciting, just listening, was sometimes called the zazen of the hearing by my teacher. It is a very nice practice. That was her main practice. In the Shurangama Sutra, we'll talk about it later. It is seen as the central practice, and traditionally, we say that the practice of Huatu, which is really listening within, turning light on the self-mind. And the light, of course, is the light of consciousness. It is not out there in our main senses. We turn it within to our hearing. Okay, we say that is both, of course, the practice of hearing meditation, fully reciting, fully listening, or listening meditation. But it is also traditionally the basis for the practice of Huatu. Huatu means before word, before thought. It is its original meaning is head word, which is at the head of a word, and the opposite to that is what is at the tail of a word. If you know, if you want, it's the aftertaste. We want the original, what was there before, what is the original self, what is the original taste, what is the original experience, to put it in that way. But beyond experience, beyond self, beyond taste, before even thought. So, so that's the meaning of Huatu. Some say you should practice listening meditation before practicing Huatu. Others say Huatu is a preliminary, very important type of practice, but really this practice should be done after that. My take on it is that first it depends, see with your teacher. But really, there is a very natural tone to it, and we will see it later, but a very concentrated, fully reciting, fully listening meditation can lead to just listening, because the name of Amitabha is uttered by the whole universe, beyond our body, beyond what is around us. Just everything screams Amitabha, and we just fully listen to what is there. So, the next section section 16 of our booklet, section 29 of the original, recitation within recitation. So it explains further the method we just opened. It's a wonderful, really, remember that's the most profound part of this text, probably. And we could do commentaries upon them. Really. To get something out of this, you must first really practice and practice and practice as it was asked for in the first part of the text. So, once recitation of the Buddha's name is perfected, once you are well rooted in it, then you just do it. Of the 6 dusts, only the dust of hearing remain. So only the dust of hearing remains because the other senses, the other consciousness linked to these senses, are not occupied predicting ideas, concepts, or whatever. That part of the chain isn't in the process at all. We aren't into attachment and repulsion with all these senses. It is really the principle. That's also one of the names of the Huatu, is keeping a single thought. That's a kind of concentration preliminary to Zen, which is very common actually in Chinese Buddhism, in Chan. That's a very common type of practice. So, keeping a single thought, keeping a single thing, just hearing. Sometimes this is called, how do you say that in English? An anti-poison? Okay, that's a poison. It's still a thought. It's still something you make. But it's a poisoned anti-poison. Okay, you only have the dust of that because you're totally one with that practice. And you don't think about the beautiful ass of the woman in front of you. You don't think about, oh, that's great. I didn't remember to say that. I like the hair on my skin or whatever. So, all 6 faculties are entirely concentrated in the faculty of hearing. The body no longer feels any coming or going. The tongue no longer knows how to move. The mind how to discriminate. The nose how to breathe. The eyes how to open and close. That's a description of really a samadhi through keeping a single thought. That's an experience of total oneness with no I, me, nothing at all. Just a full equilibrium between concentration and observation, and we will go into that very soon. So the 2 supreme methods of cultivation of the bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara and Mahastanaprapta, Mahastama in this version, are but one. They are just one. What are they, in fact? So the text goes on. Nothing is not round and perfect. Don't discriminate between these, because in the Chan tradition we say, okay, the best, if you know a bit the Shurangama Sutra, and we will teach on that later on, but generally in the Chan tradition we say, okay, the best thing in the Shurangama Sutra is a chapter of Guanyin. Of course, there is the big mantra of the Shurangama that is recited every day in Chinese monasteries. It takes very, very long to recite it. And there is the last part, which is on all the kind of wrong ways you could practice if you want. 50 of them, if I remember well. But really, the art of it is the Kuan Yin part of the sutra, where this method of returning the light around to self nature, to hearing, is taught. And generally, we kind of discriminate against the other chapters and practices because, in fact, there are a lot of practices which are shown different bodhisattvas after the Buddha has explained the links, which is the chain, which is really how that functions between a stimulus and then an act. In an example earlier, it was between a thought and a sound. And there are different methods explained by different bodhisattvas, and Bodhisattva Manjushri, Wenshu or Monju in Japanese, just choose the one of Bodhisattva, Kuan Yin Pusa, Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, to be the best one. And he says, okay, that's the best practice. And so in Chan, we are very proud because listening meditation and Huatu meditation really are born from that part of the sutra, from that practice. That's our practice, the Vajra Samadhi practice. Okay. But this part of the text tells us, okay, there are different practices in this sutra. And actually, the sutra itself says to not look down on other practices. Different people need different medicine. That's all great. They all lead to enlightenment. And here we say, okay, the practice of Mahastama, which is the practice of recitation, and the practice of Kuan Yin, which was the practice of returning the hearing on itself, the light around, are really just one if you know how to practice it. If you fully recite, which is not saying the name out loud like that, or even internally without thinking about it, but just be totally one with what you're reciting. And if you totally listen, which is the practice of Mahastama and the practice of Kuan Yin. So it is very linked to the principle of shamatha and vipassana. So shamatha bhavana is concentration practice, for lack of a better word, and vipassana bhavana, cultivation of observation. Chinese Buddhism, since a long time, especially since the Tiantai Buddhism of Master Xi, is really into the one practice which is the harmony. There is a very Taoist side to it, and of course Chan is really into that, which is the harmony between the two, between concentration, a narrow one focus on a single thought, for example, a single practice, totally one, no body, no mind, just one practice, just Amitabha, just the breath. And then observation, which is the most open, everything is welcomed into that just hearing. So this practice really is an equilibrium between the concentration and the observation, which is an equilibrium between fully saying the name, fully reciting, and listening totally to what is recited. And it is even more wonderful when it is done internally, because gosh, how does that go? There is no sound uttered, and yet I fully listen to these sounds into myself. They exist, and I say them. I'm at the origin of it. Go in that direction. That's really the practice. Investigate that. So that's concentration, or Zi in Chinese, Shi in Japanese, and Guan, which is observation, Kuan, or Kuan in Japanese. By the way, the name Kuan Yin which mean it's the same Quran, so it means literally observing sound. So that practice is not just a practice and like that. It is the origin of her name, especially in Chinese. I mean, that's very important. Listening meditation is a wonderful, wonderful meditation that can be done by anyone, anywhere. So there is a great emphasis generally in Chinese Buddhism on the practice which is an harmony between Zi Quan, Shi Kan, concentration and observation. It is very linked, as I said, to Shi He and particularly to what's called the six marvelous doors. Doors, yeah. One of these six marvelous doors is actually returning, just like the returning the eye around. And what is wonderful and really, it was seminal, like a seed in Chinese Buddhism with the contribution of this text of Qi, is that he sees the same greed through different chapters, giving us another angle on the same practice. And we see that actually each practice, for example, that's just a glimpse of it really. We will study it later, but that each practice can be done one after the other as a single practice or as needed. For example, that's just wonderful, and it shows really the fluidity of how these practices are seen. When you understood their function, you can apply them as needed. They are really medicine. So that's wonderful. So so they are round and perfect. Sorry, nothing is not round and perfect. Otherwise, everything is round and perfect. That's just wow. So no difference at all between the practice of recitation and the practice of listening when they are one, when they are done totally. So this is because sense organ is sense object. Sense object is sense organ. And both organ and object are consciousness. That's the old chain, which is very well explained in the Shurangama Sutra. The 18 elements, all the possibilities, all the chains possible from all the senses and all the consciousness linked to it are all gathered into one element, keeping one thought, one thing. Although at the outset they do not penetrate one another, in time they will gradually do. So at first it won't be possible to just have the dust of hearing, as the text begins to say. It really needs time for any practice to be established. First to establish concentration, then to establish observation, then to establish the just naturalness of the equilibrium, the harmony between the two, of just fully reciting, fully listening. So you see that very simple practice that was introduced, we are beginning to see its depth, its profundity, its subtleness. So really, reciting and listening are just one practice. My teacher used to say sometimes the golden circle, because there is a kind of circular thing when you are really into fully reciting and fully listening. Just never ends. It's a one-pointed thing. If pay attention to one thing, in this practice, it is not about self hallucination, for the lack of a better word. You know, and I really already said that, but it's really important to warn again. It is not about it is not about going into a kind of trance through recitation of a mantra, of a name, whatever. It is really, in the end, about cultivating. It is a method of cultivation to attain samadhi, to attain oneness beyond self. And the fruit of that must be wisdom. It must be prajna. That's very basic Buddhism. Sila, samadhi, prajna, discipline, concentration, meditation, and wisdom. Intuitive, direct wisdom. So that's the aim of the practice, wisdom. So we can't forget that. So the 18 elements, as I said, are all the chains possible. And they are seen just as one. All these organs and consciousness are just one big fundamental empty chain. Where are you in that empty chain? One single empty Buddha nature. But don't get stuck in that emptiness. Emptiness is actually very vivid. Emptiness is just a word. So it says it will gradually, these practices will gradually penetrate one another. And they take a bit of time to combine. It's not really that the practices need to, it's really us. We need to be grind by the practices to establish ourselves in them. We need to make one with them. Practices aren't against it. Sorry, I'm a bit. We need to make one with the practices. So then the text gives us a few advices. Usually, a clean, quiet corner should be selected for Buddha recitation. About 14 to 17 square feet in the rear. You should circumambulate once, moving clockwise, and then slowly recite the Buddha's name with your voice growing louder and louder. As you recite this way for 3 or more circumambulations, you will feel your mind voice becoming clearer, filling the universe and cycling the 10 directions, encompassing the whole Dharma realm. Oh, wonderful. This is the method of resting body, mind, and realm in the sound of the Buddha's name. And it is to rest the body and mind in the sound of the Buddha's name that you recite. This is the supreme realm which erases the polluted mind full of afflictions and which the practitioner should endeavor to reach. Wow, what a program. First, the usual.